Welcome to the Third Degree Masonic Podcast, where we are always on the level. We're your hosts. I'm Brother Samuel.
I'm Brother Gabriel.
And we're just a couple Masons trying to find our spot in this fraternity. Craftsman, thank you for joining us on our previous episode where we looked into the icons of Freemasonry with Brother George Washington. And today we have something almost as fun. I would argue more fun.
Really? More fun than George Washington?
More fun than George Washington, at least I think so. Mostly because I think that there's a lot of history about this man. And then when I found out about his Masonic history, it kind of blew my mind. Okay. So we, of course, are talking about Brother Benjamin Franklin.
Ooh, Brother Benjamin Franklin.
Who I would argue is a stark contrast to Brother George Washington. And I look forward to having a fun debate with you in a following episode about this. But Brother Gabriel, first things first, what do you know about Brother Ben Franklin? Because we have made him, he is a founding father for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, at least here. But he's not particularly a huge icon or like a folk hero for American Freemasonry like George Washington is.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the most anyone knows about him is that he's on the $100 bill.
Correct.
They don't know why. They don't know really much about him. They know he's a founding father, but they don't know much about him. I mean, I'm even guilty of not knowing too much about him. I know he's an aspiring scientist. He was an entrepreneur. He was a businessman. He was a journalist. He was a man of many words, and many critiques of many people.
Yes.
And he was a politician, a diplomat, a smooth talker.
He was America's first citizen. That's the
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. That's a very poignant way to describe Benjamin Franklin.
That's one way he's been described. So, Craftsman, Brother Gabriel is 100% correct here on all of those things. He was at one point in time all of those things. But like all men, did not start at great beginnings. He actually started off from being the poor son of a candlestick maker or a candle maker, wax maker. And he hated it.
Hard job back in the day.
Hard job. His dad hated it. He apprenticed for him for a hot minute and hated it. He then went and apprenticed under his brother who owned a print shop, which is how he learned how to be a printer.
Mm.
Hated that too. Hated working for his brother more so than the printing. Loved the printing, hated his brother.
And is this like in the 1730s, 1740s? I kind of forget the timeline on that.
It would have had to have been before the 30s because his Masonic career starts in the 30s.
Okay, yeah. So yeah. I always forget when he was born.
Once again, numbers are not my strong suit, but I got the timeline in my head correct here.
Yeah.
It's the point when we get to the end that matters. So he didn't like working for his brother, so he then left. And I believe he went to Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's generally where people think of Benjamin Franklin is Philadelphia.
He took whatever money he had, got on a boat, and went there. And just like once he got to the docks, had no plan. Just made it up as he went. Seriously. He told the ship's captain, allegedly, obviously these are all alleged, that he got a young woman in trouble and needed to get out of town very quickly. And the ship's captain took pity on him. And that story may or may not be true. Nobody knows. But so he ends up in Philadelphia. He's got no money, no prospects. He finds his way to a different print shop. Kind of jumped around, did a whole bunch of stuff, finds his way into another print shop with another guy who really liked him. Took a lot of, I don't want to say like a lot of interest in him. Made him a lot of promises that ultimately would not be kept. He sent him to England and said, hey, I want you to go here and I'm going to send documents that'll be your introduction here. And I want you to set up all this stuff here in England. Never happened. He sent him to England and he literally had nothing. So he got stuck in England for a hot minute. So then he came back to Philadelphia, and that's kind of where he starts his own, like, screw all these people. I'm done working for all these people. I'm now going to work for myself. I think he learned his lesson that ultimately at the end of the day, he could really only rely on himself. Couldn't trust working for other people. He was at their whims.
Because that's about around the time where he opens up his own print shop, right?
Yes.
That's the Philadelphia Inquirer, right? Is that what it is?
I believe that is what it is called, actually. You are correct. So it's about this time that he makes bukus and bukus of bucks from his print shops. On top of his print shops, he also found ways to get into the market of buying the ink and the paper for the supplies, and he began franchising his print shop all around the world. So they would buy into his business like a Subway, and then he would provide them the ink and the paper. He was making double the money. He was a shrewd businessman. I mean, he's a shark. He made every penny he could possibly make, and no one can say that he was. And he wasn't very nice about it, too. I mean, he got his pound of flesh when it was due.
The BBC, the Benjamin Broadcasting Company.
But on the other side of things, though, he was also very philanthropic. So being a shark in business was one thing, right? Some would even say he was a dick about it. But on the other side of things, all of the money that he made, big chunks of it were used to start things for the greater good.
Mm-hmm. Well, there wasn't a lot of government funding of things back in the day. Yeah,
really.
A lot of, like, if you wanted a church in your community or something, or if you
People
wanted,
built it.
Yeah, you built it. If you wanted a community center or a community garden, you raised it and got donations and made it. It wasn't there was no welfare system. There was no public welfare taxation system or anything like that back then.
So he started in a lot of places where he found need, right? When he would find, education, he founded one of the first public libraries. He said that crime was a problem, and instead of having a volunteer watchmen's group that kind of patrolled the streets, he made it official, and they had an official job where people's job was to be the first police force in the United States.
That's wild.
He also,
I didn't know that.
And the first volunteer fire department. All of that. He did all of that. And on top of it, not only was he so good at making these and having these ideas and getting other people to help him fund it and assist him with it, he set them up in ways so that way he didn't actively have to be in control of it. He could build it, and he knew it was in good hands, and it would be funded, and it's not going anywhere.
That's wild to think that he had a hand in creating some of the, like, systems and ways of doing things that we take for granted on a daily basis, and yet he's not our most well-known founding father.
We still do most of this stuff today. I mean, depending on where you live, we live in Genoa, whatever. Ours is a volunteer fire department. I think there might be one or two full-timers for administrative reasons, but all the firefighters I know from this town are all volunteers. Because we don't really have the need for a full-time 24/7 one when you got the volunteers that can do it, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a firefighter craftsman, so looking forward to having one of those on. We know a few of those.
Yeah, we do know a few Masonic firefighters, and we're going to have to get those on because our lodge is very big on volunteer firefighters.
Yes. But he also was on top of being philanthropic and being a shrewd shark of a businessman, he had the scientific gifted mind. It was absolutely insane. Okay? So think about it this way. You invent something really cool. What's the first thing you're going to do after you invent it?
Patent it.
Yeah. He didn't. To Benjamin Franklin, everything that he created with his money and invented were there for society's use. What is the point of inventing something to better society if you're going to lock it behind a paywall? I'm talking to you, EA Games.
That was funny.
But anyway, why lock it behind a paywall? So he's known for inventing stuff such as the lightning rod. Came up with this idea and went, electricity, it's kind of a parlor trick at this point, right? It's what they did at parties. You wind it up and touch the glass and it would shock you. And yeah, he went, I think lightning works the same way. And they went, nah, you're crazy. No way it's the same thing. It's not a parlor trick. And then, of course, he does. Obviously, we prove it with the kite flying with the key wrapped around. And everybody's seen that picture and read about it in school. And I think everybody's seen the picture of Ben holding the kite with his little boy standing next to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
His son was 30 years old at that point in time. That's a piece of history that most people don't know. He was a grown adult.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
Wait, how many kids did Ben Franklin have?
He had a few, and a couple of them were considered illegitimate. That's a part of Ben's history we're going to get to that's probably not so great.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. But yeah, he had a few of them. That one I know he at least had a son and a daughter. Might have had more, might have had less. Not quite sure. Didn't quite get that far in the history book. But what's fascinating to me is all of these inventions. So he's known for creating, and he built that to stop barn fires and stop buildings from catching on fire, right? Free patent. However, the whole world knows that Benjamin Franklin tamed the lightning, right? This took him to a whole new level of popularity. Not so much here in the United States. He was popular here in the United States for that. But all over the rest of the world, everybody just thought this was just the bee's knees. Like, absolutely insane how popular he got. Especially in France. We're going to get there, though. So... he's doing all of this. He's kind of bouncing to and from. They would send him to England. He got really popular in the government. They would send him to be a diplomat. I mean, he was considered advocate for the colonists. However, he was a very staunch loyalist to the British Crown. So maybe we're jumping ahead here, but I think it's where things get a little interesting. So where things start to get really big for America is obviously, about stuff like the Stamp Act, taxation without representation. We're paying for the French and Indian War?
Yeah, the French and Indian War, in wider scope, the 7 Years' War, but yeah.
So we're paying that back in droves. They instilled a tax to pretty much everything. They were taxing everything, stamp, paper, tea,
sugar. And some of those had been repealed, but some of those hadn't been.
Well, so they weren't repealed at this point in time. The colonists sent Ben over to try and get the government to repeal some of those acts. And Ben was kind of in this weird spot. He loved his colonists, but he also loved England. He was a loyal subject of the crown.
Because at the time, the colonists considered themselves Englishmen. It wasn't, some of them did, because there was this idea that because a lot of them were transplants from England, it's not like a conquered colony like some of the Asian or African holdings of the British Empire. Right. They considered themselves Englishmen of English stock, or at least a lot of them did.
Yes.
And so there was this idea that they are still Englishmen, still English citizens, and that's where it gets into this weird kind of how they related to being colonists, but also Englishmen, or thinking they were Englishmen.
Yes.
And then England being like, well, we're Englishmen, you're colonists.
Correct. So Ben sits in that weird middle ground, right? He went, hey, there's a world here where the colonists are Englishmen and we are all part of the British Crown, but also at the same time, the colonies are making money for you and bringing in all these resources and everything, so you got to give them a little bit of a bone every now and then. So he advocated as much as he could to play both sides. And this, I would argue, was bad for him. Okay? So he goes to England and he's fighting for the colonists. He gets a couple of the things repealed, but then you have, I believe it's called the Boston Massacre. Does that sound right?
Well, so are you talking about when the British soldiers fire on our?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the Boston
Massacre. That's right.
Well, because there had been a whole bunch of stuff going on, and there were British troops in Boston, and the colonists were upset, or the Bostonians.
And
like modern day, the Bostonians are always upset.
Yep.
And
the Bostons.
The Bostonians, and they rebelled, and there was actually, to touch on another one of our founding fathers and presidents, it was interesting because future founding father and president John Adams was the lawyer for the British soldiers who were standing trial and eventually got acquitted of charges, which only angered the colonists even more.
Yep. So the Boston Massacre was kind of a point where, how do I put this? It was a turning point, right? It was a point in the United States where everybody kind of went, you're either with us or you're against us, right? There was kind of like lines were starting to be drawn in the sand for what we were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So Ben, once again, wanting to be in between the two, he was never considered good enough to be British, part of the British Crown, right? He was never considered, he was a colonist.
Yeah.
And the British looked at him as a colonist. And the colonists saw him as too British. He was literally just, it didn't matter what he did. People talked shit about Ben Franklin in the United States and in England. But he pled the case. They started to repeal some of the acts. Then we kind of fast forward a little bit. We go back. He comes home. Everything kind of is going the way it is. He comes across some documents that were given to him, and he releases those documents. And they don't look good for the governor of the colonies. Essentially, the governor it was proof that he was plotting against the colonists, more or less. Ben released those documents, and they looked really bad. And he did not, when asked about it, he didn't fess up to being the one to do it until somebody he knew was going to take the blame for it. And then he kind of was like, I did it. So he got called back to England at one point in time and got drug across the carpet. He stood there and was berated for hours by the, essentially would be like our attorney general, the English version of that. And he stood there for over an hour and berated Ben Franklin in front of the hierarchy, essentially. And I believe the words were, no documents are safe with men like Ben Franklin around unless they're locked in a writing desk. And he stood there for over an hour listening to himself be insulted. And he didn't say a word. When it was all done, he walked out. And it was at that moment in time, the rebel Ben Franklin was born. That's when they took him. He went from being in between the two to being a rebel. He goes back. And mind you, he's not a young man at this point in time. He's an older gentleman.
Yeah,
right?
he's in his like 30s or 40s at this point, right?
40s or 50s. He was old at this point in time. He should have been retired and doing nothing. So the war breaks out, inevitable. Someone has to go to France and find us allies.
Why not the person who already has some connections over there?
Correct. So they send old man Ben over. And Ben comes to France and finds he is... who would be a perfect person to... He is Taylor Swift of France. That's not even a... That's like not even a...
Exaggeration.
So, yes. So the French absolutely loved Ben Franklin, right? They thought he was a man of mystery, of science. He was larger than life. He had brooches and plates. Like, imagine a McDonald's plate with your face on it and walking into a McDonald's and seeing your face on a McDonald's plate and going, what the hell? This is what it had to be like for him getting there, because he was that big of a celebrity. They loved him. He slowly made his way into the court of France, because we're not a country yet.
Yeah.
And we are the enemy of their enemy. So it was kind of interesting for them to, they weren't going to officially give us the back channeling to get what we needed. But on top of it, this is what I didn't know. Did you know that while he was there, he was an arms dealer too? Ben Franklin, the arms dealer.
I did not know that Ben Franklin was technically an international arms dealer.
He was making deals to get us guns. Where do you think they came from?
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, but
put it that
arms
way,
dealing.
Yeah.
I mean, he was doing all of this. But on top of being a rock star, he's getting implanted in some of the biggest parties and social circles in France. You weren't having a party if Ben Franklin wasn't at your party was shit.
Wow.
Period. And I think somebody said he was in his 50s or 60s at this point in time. The women loved him. Absolutely loved him. 20-year-old women were just throwing themselves at his feet. And they loved him because he paid attention to them.
Mind blown.
Right. Women still want you to pay attention to them. That's all they want. But anyway, there's a lot of, I hear a lot of things about him getting involved in these, let's call them sordid affairs, right? You can call them what they were, that he cheated on his wife. Mind you, at this point in time, his wife's passed away. He's actually a widower at this point in time. So he's
going and partying.
He's going and partying with these young women. There's a couple of them in particular that he really fancied and really chased after. One of them, he made a side-handed remark about getting married, and she turned him down. But yeah, he's going to these parties, and he's finding the United States all of the, shall we call it, all the support and all the resources.
Validation that it wants.
Yeah, all the validation we could use. And eventually he got us the support of the French.
It took years though, to do that.
Now, yeah, and this is not, we talk about nowadays how, military decisions are made in instantaneous, minute by minute, right? I mean, being in the military. It wasn't like this back then. I mean, you got communications going across the ocean. It's taking forever for any of this, for news to pass, for things to change. I mean, for God's sakes, you get 2 boxes of guns and it's going to take them a month to get there. By the time it's done, So he was there for quite some time doing his duty. And then, of course, he gets us what we need and we win the war. He's still kind of stuck around for a hot minute.
Yeah?
Yeah. He just enjoyed his time in France.
Generally, people do enjoy their times in France, depending on where you go and who you interact with. But
depending on who you talk to. But he finally decided to go home. And at this point in time, he was a very old man. Like, we're talking late 60s. Maybe early 70s. I can't quite remember.
Well, because he was back in time for the Constitutional Convention and for the
yes,
and for the election of George Washington. Like, because he was there for the fundamentals of the Constitutional Convention.
He went back.
Yeah,
he enjoyed being in France so much, he kept going back And he was actually kind of mad when they were dragging him to do other stuff. He requested to come home after we won the war, and they were like, give it a little bit, comes back. And then, like you said, he's a part of the congressional convention and what have you. He's doing all of that. He's doing his part. He is going above and beyond, just like Brother Washington did. You know, he's busting his butt at a time when he should just be sitting in a rocking chair, sleeping and enjoying the Lord. You know, he's a rich man. You know, his company's still doing what his company does. He should just be enjoying it. But no, not Brother Ben Franklin, because that's not what a good citizen does. So finally, his final time coming home from France, after everything else, he said, and I quote, well, they're like, oh, you should stay here, you should stay here, you should stay here. He said, no, I want to die in my home. I want to die an American. And he came back, and even here, he was not exactly well received. You know, you'd think he would be the hero of the United States. He had so many detractors over here and people that didn't like him. It was kind of sad, honestly. But it was just politics of the game. To go from somewhere where you are just adored and almost treated like a rock star to coming back here and being treated like dog poop.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad. His daughter even asked him before he died, like, why did you even come back here? They don't love you the way they do in France. He said, that's not my home. This is my home. It's very sad, but tells you a little bit about the man. And then he passes away, and his grave is, it's absolutely astounding. Let me see if I can find a picture of it, because you would think how ostentatious some of these, you know, gravestones we hear about people now.
Was his very ornate and immaculate, or are we talking on the practical and simplistic side?
He has a that's somebody else's.
Finding the picture of it?
Yeah, I'm finding it. So his gravestone in Philadelphia is just a simple gravestone. Thank God for editing, craftsman. Thank God for editing. Wow, all of these pictures are super blurry. Thanks, Google. Here we go. So he has a plaque on his gravestone leading to it. And it says, the body of B. Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for worms. But the work shall not be lost, for it will be, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more elegant edition, corrected and improved by the author.
I like that. That's really...
you can't beat that.
That's
some humble shit.
Yeah, that's some from a man who was super wealthy and super loved around the world, just to have a small, simple grave and a plaque that says that.
Well, break it down, right? Here lies the body of Ben Franklin, a humble printer. That's all he ever saw himself as. Like a book, it will come back rewritten, changed from the author. My spirit will live on and will come back in the form from the author.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
great author,
the great author of the universe. And it just absolutely blew my mind. Once again, we have a very humble man who you could have had diplomat, you could have had hero of the Republic, you could have had anything you wanted. He just puts printer. It just blows my mind. What do you think of that?
See, I've thought at length about my gravestone before. I know that sounds a little morbid, but I don't know if I could be that humble. Right. I don't know. I want to be. I would want to say that I could be, but I don't know if I could be.
I know, right?
So
once again, just like with George Washington, if you were offered unlimited power, would you take it? Probably. He didn't. If you could write your epitaph and it was something humble like that, would you? Probably not. But he did. It blows my mind how crazy of a life he led, right? And don't get me wrong, he had his detractors. He had his problems. He went above and beyond to try and be better, though. He was constantly trying to improve himself. He was a womanizer for sure. For sure. There's proof of that. He had at least one illegitimate child that we can prove, probably more. You know, he was kind of playing around with women in France.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't married, so, I mean, you can call that what you want. I mean, back then it was probably abhorrent that he was doing that, but I don't, in today's standards, was it really that bad?
In today's standards, no, but that's not how at the time it was perceived.
Correct. But we're talking about a man that had so much interior, what do you call it? Self-inspection.
So, self-reflection, self-inspection.
Self-inspection. Yeah, what you say I do. He had so much of that he knew
introspection.
He had to improve himself constantly. So,
and I wonder where he gets that idea from.
Well, Craftsman, when we come back from the break here in just a couple moments, his Masonic career is absolutely fascinating too. If you thought his life was crazy, his Masonic history blows my mind. So, Craftsman, we'll be back in just a couple minutes to go over the awesome Masonic history of Brother Ben Franklin.
If you're in the market for even more Masonic content, check out our brothers from 357 Studio. Enjoy this short message from their host.
At Studio 357 Masonic Podcast, we consider ourselves to be the blue-collar Masons. We're not professionals, we're not very well-spoken, but we are 100% genuine in every show that we put out. Every Mason has a story, and we want to help tell it. We are available in video versions on YouTube and Spotify, and audio versions just about everywhere else. Please follow us on our socials on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We hope to see you on our show. Travel well, my brothers.
Welcome back, Craftsmen, to the Third Degree Masonic Podcast, where we are always on the level. I'm Brother Samuel.
And I'm Brother Gabriel.
And we are returning back with our awesome in-depth look into another icon of Freemasonry, Brother Benjamin Franklin.
Awesome.
So, before the break, we kind of had a very vague, I shouldn't say vague, a summary of Ben Franklin's life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the big deep in-betweens, but to give you enough of an idea of his life, some of the things that he has accomplished, and where what he was kind of like.
Mm-hmm.
He was a shrewd businessman, but he was also very charity-minded, trying to make things better for the people around him. And he had the means and the money to do so. And also had the mindset that the things that he created, while he could have probably patented all of them and became rich beyond all means, he didn't. He gave them away more or less for free. They weren't how he made money.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to go into his Masonic history, and it is pretty fascinating. So you remember I talked about him going to England at one point in time in his early life. It was 1730. He was coming back from it, and he was 24 years old, right? Coming back to his own print shop. So anyway, he's coming back from England. He's recently married. This is kind of where the illegitimate child comes from. He's got one maybe on the way. Maybe he wasn't making such good decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
He decides he wants to turn a new leaf, right? He's doing better. He's trying to improve himself. He learns of the Freemasons, probably while he was in England. Nobody knows exactly when, but there was a Masonic chapter in Philadelphia. Okay? Pretty active. But you got to remember that colonial masonry is a little bit differently than, let's say, what it is today, right?
Mm.
You go into a Masonic lodge today, you have, I don't know, let's say a couple of guys who work in insurance and they make pretty good money. You got a couple of guys who were hardworking blue-collar guys. I mean, it really geographically depends what your lodge makeup is. And the fact of the matter is that it doesn't matter what they do. It's the interior qualifications that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in colonial Masonry, that is true. That is all still true. But its membership is usually the aristocratic, the mercantile class, the people that have the money, the disposable time and income to be able to do this kind of stuff, right? I mean, your average everyday farmer does not have time. Average. I mean, they still happened, but for the most part, a lot of these guys were pretty well-to-do off. So Franklin learns about Masonry, and you think about today's standards. How'd you join Lodge, Gabe?
Because I was in DeMolay.
But how did you?
I petitioned.
Right.
And you guys investigated me because you were already Lodge brothers.
Sure.
And then I was initiated, passed, and raised.
Perfect. Ben Franklin wrote a letter in his newspaper pretty much poking the hornet's nest and saying that Masonry was childish and stupid.
Basically doing the playground, chase after me kind
more
of
or
thing.
less what happened.
That's so wild.
Posted it in there, called it childish, and then when they came to talk to him about it, he joined. And I have part of it here, part of what he wrote. The world has long admired that in such a numerous company that there has been no one found that in his cups or in any other circumstance would discover their mysteries. But the whole appears so childish and ridiculous that this is probably the case, that their grand secret is that they have no secrets at all. I love it.
So surprisingly accurate, but God, can you imagine if that's how we got our Lodge brothers now? Is we
grabbed our detractors?
Is like we looked at people's posts on Facebook in the local area and then just showed up at their house?
Well,
that would be terrible. Can you imagine like someone on Facebook that we know just starts dunking on Genoa Lodge, and then 4 of us just randomly show up at their house? Back in the day, that would not it still would have not been good, but it would have been Nowadays, that will probably be met with gunfire.
Correct. Well, it'd be like, hey.
Well, you'd show up with your bike and in your leather. I'd show up in my high vis and like a giant pipe wrench, and Jack would have his high vis and a chainsaw, and Tanner would be there with.
It probably wasn't quite that extravagant. They probably just saw him at a social function or came to his print shop and was like, "What the hell? What did we do to you? Who spit in your Cheerios, man?"
Mm.
But a year later, he joins and becomes highly, highly active. I mean, he goes above and beyond to involve himself in Masonic affairs at his lodge, which, by the way, he joined St. John's Lodge, which met at Tun Tavern in Philadelphia. He also published the first Masonic book in the colonies, America. And it was Anderson's Book of Constitutions from England. And this allowed Masonic lodges to have some form of uniformity when it came to conducting Masonic rituals.
That's incredible.
Right. While we don't follow Anderson's today, because it's debatably antiquated, and each jurisdiction in the United States gets to more or less, I don't want to say make up its own ritual, but we do every state does something different.
Yeah, every state does something slightly different.
The point of the matter gets across the same, but the actual,
meat and cheese
is different, which is why it's fascinating to go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So even for us, going up north just a little bit into Michigan, they do things completely different than we do. Love you, brothers.
We're going to get some letters and some calls on that.
I don't care. But like when we went to
Gettysburg.
and we got to sit in on a meeting for
I want
that.
to go there for my birthday this year.
All right. Let me know when you want to go. We'll make it happen. But when we went there, it's not a Masonic secret, but like their master doesn't sit during the whole meeting. He stands and conducts the meeting. Everybody else sits, gets up and down. He stands the whole time.
Huh.
Why? I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason for it in their ritual, but could you imagine Charlie standing for the whole meeting? His legs would hurt.
My legs would hurt
My
for
legs
him.
would hurt. Oh, yeah, you were a master. How would you feel to have to stand for the whole meeting?
I would.
2 hours.
I would say, okay, all right, everybody go home.
Yeah, we're done. So, Bet joins the Masonic Lodge, becomes super active. He uses his influence and his printing businesses to also print articles in the paper, doing the complete opposite of what he did initially, just talking about the accolades of Freemasonry, how important they are in the colonies, all the good that they're doing, and it helps them grow a little bit. Or at the very least, when people saw Masons out and about and saw them doing Masonic activities, they weren't so suspicious of it, right? It wasn't this mysterious organization that
no one knew anything about.
Correct. On top of all of that, so he became so active that, so think about it this way, when their colony, there's no United States, right? We're still in the colonies. Each colony is kind of doing something different. Their colony wasn't technically officially given a blessing by the Grand Lodge of England. And in typical Masonic ways, asked for forgiveness later rather than permission. So Franklin aimed to change that. He got in touch with other colonies around him and got so active in it that he was appointed as the Grand Master for the colony in 1749.
Wow.
This was only a few years after he joined. He became the Grand Master of all the Masons in Pennsylvania, right? Philadelphia.
In the Pennsylvania Commonwealth.
Commonwealth, yes. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's wild.
I know. Like, blows my mind. Could you imagine, 3-4 years?
Like, I've been a Mason for almost 10 years. You've been for 10 years already, but imagine had you only been in for 3 years and now you're a Grand Master, Wilburn.
Bam.
Yeah. You're so active, they want to make you Grand Master.
Oh, yeah. And on top of all of that, on top of being the Grand Master, he was there when they dedicated the first Masonic building that was constructed in America, like the first official Masonic building.
Wow.
He also laid the cornerstone for the State House in Philadelphia.
Why is this man not our icon of Freemasonry?
I argue this all the time. We'll get there. So he's super active in we got a guy who is a businessman, shrewd businessman, philanthropic, gives money to charity. Intelligent scientist, self-made again, just like George Washington. There's no formal education here. This is all self-taught. And he finds the craft by accident or design. He poked the hornet's nest. He knew what he was doing. And joins a year later and then goes full feet forward, doing all of these good acts in his neighborhood. He's Mr. Rogers of the 1700s. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Build your local library, build your police department, fire department.
You saying that now makes me think of Benjamin Franklin in the old-fashioned white knee-high stockings with the buckle shoes, just skipping along and be like, just
that's on
whistling.
PBS, so we're not going to get sued.
Yeah, just whistling the Mr. Rogers, skipping along
right.
with a cane and his.
But seriously, he's at least for his time, he was Mr. Mason. He was Charlie Murphy. He was their Charlie Murphy, okay? He was just active in everything. And I'm sure if you're out there and you're not from our jurisdiction, Craftsman, you know a guy like this. He's the guy that's had everything and does everything. And he probably was a grandmaster at one point in time.
Heck, some of the listeners from other jurisdictions might know
Charlie. I don't know. But I digress. But what's fascinating is after the fact, this is all while he's here. He's still a loyal British, that he goes to England to get the blessing of England to have the charter, right? Once everything kicks off and the Hornet's Nest is kicked off for the war and he goes over to France, he uses not only his connections for being a rock star over there, but he gets super active in French Masonry too.
I want to know what French Masonry is like. Like English Masonry is like way more refined and upper class and like bougie than our Masonry.
Yeah.
But I want to know what French Masonry is like. Like I imagine their gavels are baguettes. and they sing all of the lectures in French. And
they might. I don't know. Craftsman, I need someone from France to get a hold of us ASAP. I want to know what masonry's like in France. But he goes and becomes active in French Masonry.
That's incredible.
He was, there was a couple of people, I'm trying to think of who, I think it was Voltaire. I think the rumor is that he was at the raising of Voltaire into Masonry.
Oh, that's incredible. I hope that's true.
I do too. I mean, I believe that's correct, and if I'm wrong, I apologize. I'm just thinking of all of the...
Can you imagine being that active, that you're active in another country's Masonry too?
Yes. Yeah.
While being a businessman and a diplomat and a celebrity. And
isn't it insane?
They were just built different back then.
Well,
they also didn't have like social media and stuff to distract them. So.
Yeah, right. I mean, what else were you going to do? But yeah, and then on top of being active in all of this, Masonry, a lot of the generals and soldiers that came over to us from France, funny enough, were Masons. So
was Lafayette a Mason?
That one I'm not sure. I don't want to put my name on that one. It could be. Probably.
I'll have to find that out.
Might be. I'll have to look into that one. But a lot of these guys that came over, and you think they came over because, we're going to put it to the English. I mean, they might have, but, I like to think, too, that they went, we're going to put it to the English, and you're our brother. We got you, brother. But
I wonder what a Masonic war call sounds like.
Jeez, I don't know. There's a joke in there about some of the things involving a cane and about rattling one around that I probably could go with, but I'm not going to go there. But I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, right? Because we're getting pretty close to the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
We have a man who did so much in his life, not only for himself, but for his community. Actively made an attempt every single day to try and make himself and his community better. And active in Freemasonry. And in the building of our country.
Mm-hmm.
And he was considered by some of the other founding fathers to be their advisor. Like, we're not going to do this without Ben here. We need Ben here to be the voice of reason. And we got a man that was so loyal up until he was absolutely stabbed in the back by his English superiors, that we might not be the country we are today had he not been stabbed in the back, made angry. Like, you always talk about...
It's always weird how history works out like that, isn't it?
What's the moment in time that revolutionized you? That was his, right? It blows my mind. Now, are we talking about a man that's perfect? Absolutely not. We have a debatable, arguable womanizer who, by the way, there's not really any accounts of him ever cheating on his wife once he did settle down. But he liked the ladies. But he had his wife. But here's the other thing, though. He was gone from home most of the time. So a big chunk of their marriage was letters to each other. from England or France. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Could you just imagine telling your wife that you're going to be gone for 10 years and every time you write her a letter, say, oh, just another couple of months. I'm sorry, my love.
Or I'm still here for another few years. You might get a letter from me in another 6 months or so.
Correct. And, you know, when he did come home, she was happy to see him and blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, this man, a lot of the time that he spent away was, at least before the war, was by choice. He didn't come. So you'd rather be out and about doing things in other countries and be at home. That's probably not something. But who knows? I mean, like you said, we're talking about a time back then where things were different. I couldn't even imagine it nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he had at least one illegitimate child, is what it is. I mean, how many people nowadays have that now, though? I mean, we're talking about the difference between, like you said in our previous, can you transplant yourself into a different time versus now, right?
Yeah, this whole idea of historical moral revisionism just does such a disservice to the study of history. I think it's,
but also
I believe it was a favorite YouTuber of mine who said it's the pompous term for this is called historiography. And the study of how the perception of history changes over time. It's a very pompous word to say that historians get full of themselves after a while.
Well, but I would argue that you also can look at history back in today's mirror and see the opposite. So you're saying, oh, we're mad because that's how history was back then. I can look back and go, maybe that wasn't such a big deal. Not everything, obviously, but in this case, did what Brother Ben Franklin do? Was it really that big of a deal? I don't think so by today's standards. I think he would just be considered another millionaire mogul. He'd be Elon Musk of our era.
Kind of, yeah. The issue is
like
that,
or hate Elon, by the way. I'm making a point.
Yeah, of how he would be perceived nowadays. The issue is kind of like when you. It's the curse of putting yourself in the peacemaker position, because it can really backfire on you. Because you wind up in this situation where, like,
everybody hates you.
Where devoted colonist rebels were like, he's pandering to the British too much. And then the British were like, well, you're not doing enough to support us as a loyal subject. And then it gets to this, like, this rough gray area where, like, both sides think you're not doing enough, which already tarnishes your reputation enough. And then he eventually comes on board, but then the hardcore rebels are like, you weren't here from the beginning. You didn't support us from the very beginning. And then they push this idea that he wasn't a hardcore supporter and everything, which is not true. He eventually became a very ardent supporter. But then again, it's that curse of trying to play the both sides can do you a reputation disservice that sometimes you just can't recover from.
Right. Because
you get accused of being a fence sitter or a non-committal or
and I think that. he wanted things to go back to being peaceful like they were in the beginning, but
as most of the business class did.
Right. So we get done with all of this. And I really look forward to in our next episode where you and I are going to kind of compare and contrast Brother Washington and Brother Franklin Masonically. And kind of have that debate on why one versus the other should be, could be, or would be our Masonic.
That's going to be an interesting discussion because I think you've helped sway my idea a little bit, but there's also some valid points the other way, too.
I know, and I'm looking forward to that. But at the end of the day, we're talking about Ben Franklin here. We got a man who did so much for our country, was considered a rock star in another country, pushed Masonry, involved himself in Masonry, not only on our continent, but on other continents, and was nothing but a loyal member of the fraternity. And at the end of his days, he takes the humble ending with a very humble epitaph of Here Lies Ben Franklin, a book that will once again be made again, new and improved by the author. And that's it. That's the end. What do you think?
You could have just ended the podcast episode right there. That was a pretty poignant way to tie it up.
I mean, we're talking about a man that did so much for our country, never asked for anything in return, did so much for his neighborhood, in his early days, never asked for anything in return, and did so much for colonial Freemasonry, American Freemasonry.
He's the archetype of the old American citizen.
He's the first American citizen. And I would argue the first American Freemason. That's my opinion. That's not a historical fact by any means, but he is, to me, and we'll argue about this later, but he's what I think every Freemason should aim to become. And I have a rant that I am still cooking in my head here, but I'm going to sit on my soapbox for a hot minute one of these days, and I've got some thoughts on this, because everything I learned about Brother Franklin has really got that sacred flame inside me going. If I thought Brother Carter's message had me going, the history of Ben Franklin just took it and just threw gasoline on the fire, right? We're talking about a man who literally went, man, I'm here to make my world better. I mean, I feel like there was a point in time where that's what Masonry was. It was about making the world around you better and living those Masonic principles outside of the lodge.
And I think
Ben Franklin knocked it out of the park in droves.
I think we will discuss this at length in our next episode.
I agree. It's got my brain going, and I got some thoughts about it. So we'll get into that later. But as for the life and times of Ben Franklin and his Masonic history, I think it's I was reading and watching videos, and my brain is going, holy crap.
Mm-hmm.
How's he doing so much?
They're built different.
They just were built different.
And on that note,
Craftsman, thank you for joining us on the Third Degree Masonic Podcast. We thank you for having us and for listening to us, and we look forward to our next episode with you, where we kind of talk about these icons of Freemasonry, where they could end up, being, or where our thoughts on them concluding, and also maybe what lessons there are to be learned from the past. And what can we learn for the future of Freemasonry from yesterday's Freemasonry? So as always, Craftsman,
keep your working tools in order.
And always be on the level. Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the Grand Lodge of Ohio, its officers, or any of its jurisdictions. They only reflect those of the hosts or guests.